Hey folks, it's Dr. Phil here. It's going to be a video on clarifying the research question. Um, Sounds kind of maybe like an easy thing to do. Turns out it's not always as easy as you may or might think. So, tasks associated with stage one. Define the management research question. Value the research, right? What is the research supposed to do, right? What is it that you hope to get out of that? And justify and budget for the research. Obviously, research isn't free. It can be quite expensive. It can be very time consuming. It can go on for a long time. So, making sure that you have sort of institutional buy-in from key stakeholders is super important. All right, so let's work our way through what we call the management research question hierarchy. So the management dilemma, look at the bottom. So what symptoms cause management concern? What environmental stimuli raise management interest? So management question, the first thing is number one, how can management eliminate the negative symptoms? And how can management fully capitalize on an opportunity? And for number two, research questions, what plausible courses of action are available to management to correct the problem or take advantage of the opportunity, and which should be considered? For number three, investigative questions, what does the manager need to know to choose the best alternative from the available courses of action? And number four, measurement questions, what should be asked or observed to obtain the information the manager needs? And then ultimately, the management decision, what is the recommended course of action given the research insights? So here we see some categories, again, this is not exhaustive, just some examples here for you, some questions that might be asked within that category, and then some sample management questions. So if we just pick one, say, troubleshooting, diagnosing ways an organization is failing to meet its goals. So the general question would be, why is our whatever program not meeting its goals? In the sample management questions, here we have two. Why does our department have the lowest sales to web page visit ratio? And why does our recruiting program generate the lowest hire to offer ratio in the industry? So again, it's thinking about a problem and then thinking about it sort of, more like a funnel kind of approach. You start more generically and you kind of hone in on it. So here we see Exhibit 3.3, the management research question hierarchy for SailPro. So declining sales is one of the most common symptoms serving as a stimulus for a research project, especially a continuing pattern that's unexplained. So SalesPro, a large manufacturer of industrial goods, faces this situation. Exploration in part one reveals that sales, in fact, should not be declining in the south and northeast. Environmental factors there are as favorable in the growing regions. Subsequent exploration, 2 and 3, leads management to believe that the problem is, in fact, one of the three areas: salesperson compensation, product formulation, or trade advertising. Further exploration, 4, as SailPro management narrowing the focus of its research to alternative ways to alter the sales compensation system, which 5 leads to a survey of all sales personnel in the affected region. So you can kind of see how they started with a problem, and then they thought about, all right, how are we going to tackle this problem? What's the management question? What's the research question? What's the investigative questions we need to ask? And then ultimately, what are the measurement questions? All right, tasks of exploration. So understand management dilemma, management problem, and research question. So let's make sure everybody is on the same page and everybody is on board with that. Now discover how others have addressed or solved similar problems. There's no need to recreate the wheel. If somebody has done something identical or similar before and it's yielded good results, there's nothing wrong with doing that again. Establish priorities for addressing management dilemmas or management problems. Identify action options and develop hypotheses, and then gather appropriate background information in order to refine the research question. Let's identify information to formulate investigative questions. All right, and we'll talk a little bit later in this video about, where might you get that information from. Develop operational definitions for concepts, constructs, and variables. Provide evidence for justifying and budgeting research. Set foundation for final research design, and identify sources for sample frames and measurement questions. Establish the range and scope of possible management decisions with regard to the desired outcomes of the exploration. Establish major dimensions of research task. Define a set of subsidiary questions that may help guide the research design. And remember, research design is super important. If you get that wrong, then your survey may not do what you intended, and you may also get erroneous results. We're going to want to develop hypotheses about possible causes of the management dilemma, learn which hypothesis can be safely ignored, so like a process of elimination, if you will, with evidence, and conclude additional research is not needed or not feasible. So maybe you identify the problem before you even need to undertake a research study. Now, with respect to the exploration strategy, so what information sources should be used? And what methods will be used to extract information from these sources? So the questions to ask of people. And this is not obviously this is not an exhaustive list. What is being done? What has been tried with or without success? How have things changed? Who is involved in the decisions? What problem areas can be seen? And who can we expect to assist or participate in research on this issue or topic? And here we see some levels of published and digital sources. So primary sources could be things like interviews, memos, speeches, letters, laws that are applicable, internal records. Secondary sources could include encyclopedias, magazines, newscasts, textbooks, handbooks, and even newspapers. And then tertiary sources could be things like the internet, other searches you may do, extraneous searches, like bibliographies, indexes, etc. So primary internal sources. Many companies reward programs collect transaction data made via store-owned credit programs. So think about these loyalty cards. Someone's got a Sears card, a Belt card, CVS card, so on and so forth. So using that data can reveal the likely success of a promotion or the sales lift effect of a price incentive. Possibly conduct a literature search. Literature reviews are something that's very common in the world of research. So again, define the management dilemma, consult books or articles for relevant terms, use the terms to search, and that's important because if you don't, it's like using an AI prompt. What you put in is what you get out. So if you put in the wrong prompt, you're probably going to get out the wrong output. So I would say make sure your search terms are, up to snuff, if you will, up to scratch. Locate and review secondary sources, where applicable. I'd say where applicable, and evaluate the value of each source and content. So types of secondary sources. So we touched on some of these earlier in this lecture, things like directories, dictionaries, encyclopedias, handbooks, possibly indexes and bibliographies. And evaluate, that's important too, evaluate published and digital sources, right? What's the format? Who was the audience of that research or the publication? What was the purpose of it? What was the scope of it? Because you want to make sure the scope is fitting into what you're doing. There should be at least some overlap there. And also, probably, I'd say one of the most important is the authority because, you know, who is it written by? Is it somebody that's credible? Is it bona fide? Was the research done properly? Right? If it's like government website, National Institute of Health, for example, I'm more likely going to believe that than somebody that just sat down one day in his or her kitchen and just started typing, right? Because that's probably got more authoritative sourcing behind it, if you will. So yeah, evaluating internal sources, things like compatibility. Is it compatible with what you're doing? Timelessness. Maybe the results are outdated. How recent was it? If it's 50 years ago, maybe it's a little too old. Quality. I spoke a little bit on that just now. For quality, I'd look at things like research design and then the author's experience. Is the author an experienced researcher? And fine-tuning the research question. We would want to operationally define the variables. So, what we mean by that is like, what are we going to use to measure this? What are we going to use to measure that? And then formulate levels of research questions. Set the scope of the study, evaluate the hypothesis, and then determine the necessary evidence. So what we mean by that is like, what evidence do we need to either accept or reject the hypothesis? All right. Thanks as always for watching, and I will see you all in a video very soon.